Welcome back to Palestine Bookshelf. I'm Stephen Heiner, and today we're going to be discussing The Palestine Laboratory: How Israel Exports the Technology of Occupation Around the World by Antony Loewenstein. I've actually done a long review of this book before on my Stephen Heiner channel as the Palestine Bookshelf project was getting up and running. However, in that review, I mentioned that some of the job that Loewenstein does here is talk about the other countries, the other political groups that are buying technology from Elbit and these other Israeli companies. And I said at that time, I said, that is important. However, I want to focus on the Palestinians, so I didn't review that portion of the book. This is going to be an express version of that review, but I still want to mention there's other important parts of this book that I'm not reviewing, but I still think you should look into it. And it's not a long book anyway. It's relatively short. Yeah, I want to say 200, less than 200, fewer than 250 pages with endnotes. So as I say, I'll link to my original review in the description, and I'll put up a card for it. If you put these two reviews together, I think you'll get a really good sense of the book. But if you want the long one, go over there. So let's start with, you could say, the commercial end of this, the marketing. What's the idea of how Israel markets its products? Israel has developed a world-class weapons industry with equipment conveniently tested on occupied Palestinians, then marketed as battle-tested or as tested on terrorists. Cashing in on the IDF brand has successfully led to Israeli security companies being some of the most successful in the world. The Palestine Laboratory is a signature Israeli selling point. Think of the infamous Pegasus mobile phone hacking software built by Israeli cyber firm NSO Group, and how it proliferated during the Netanyahu era as Israel used it to rally diplomatic support internationally. Israel's old-style ethno-nationalism and its hardline treatment of Palestinians, once an international liability, have become an asset, wrote Max Fisher and Amanda Taub in the New York Times in 2019. This advantage has been a long time in the making. Reading journalist Robert Fisk's seminal account of the Lebanese Civil War, Pity the Nation, it's clear that the Israeli military and the rhetorical playbook was being developed in the early 1980s when it disastrously invaded and occupied Lebanon. The Israelis then used the term surgical precision when describing the deadly attacks by its air force. That was a lie because countless innocent Lebanese were murdered. Killing or injuring Palestinians should be as easy as ordering pizza. That was the logic behind an Israeli military-designed app in 2020 that allowed a commander in the field to send details about a target on an electronic device to troops who would then quickly neutralize that Palestinian. The colonel working on the project, Oren Matzliach, told the Israel Defense website that the strike would be like ordering a book on Amazon or a pizza in a pizzeria using your smartphone. This kind of dehumanization is the inevitable result of endless occupation. It is also an export asset. What's appealing to growing numbers of regimes globally is learning how Israel gets away with politicide. That term was adapted to Israel-Palestine by the late Israeli scholar and professor of sociology Baruch Kimmerling, who argued in 2003 that Israel's domestic and foreign policy is largely oriented towards one major goal: the politicide of the Palestinian people. By politicide, I mean a process that has as its ultimate goal the dissolution of the Palestinian people's existence as a legitimate social, political, and economic entity. This process may also, but not necessarily include, their partial or complete ethnic cleansing from the territory known as the Land of Israel. And I should also comment that we have AI, Lavender, being used during the most recent violence in Gaza from October 2023 to 2025, in which there was an app, and I talked about this in a documentary. I'll put a link to it in the description as well as a card for it. And the name for it was Daddy's Home, with the idea that so-called terrorists would be at a place longer if it was their home. But that meant that there would be children, family there, and that's when they would give the kill order to kill everybody. And the fact that they would call the app or call the technology Daddy's Home just shows you the level of dehumanization that's going on here. This refers to the Great March of Return. If you don't know about that, I'll put a link in the description to Gaza Fights for Freedom, which was Abby Martin's documentary on the Great March of Return, which was a peaceful, nonviolent protest that happened in 2018, and a classic example of, well, why don't they try nonviolent protest? Well, they try it all the time and they get murdered. The Great March of Return was both a lab and showroom. The most sophisticated new weapon used against the Palestinian protesters was the Sea of Tears, a drone that dropped tear gas canisters on a desired area. Despite Israeli claims of accuracy, a tent full of Palestinian women and children had tear gas dropped onto them, as did groups of reporters. Remember, they always say that this was an accident, but either the Israeli military is incompetent, you have to believe that, because they do have these accidents all the time, or it's on purpose. What's easier to believe? Despite Israeli claims of accuracy, as I said, Israeli police started using drones that dropped tear gas grenades on protesters in the West Bank in April 2021. 1 month later, Israel announced that a fleet of drones would be used to track riots and protests as well as areas damaged by rockets fired from Gaza. Israel announced in 2022 that it approved the use of armed drones for targeted killings in the West Bank. Now, you have to remember that this is allegedly the most moral army in the world. So you can manufacture weapons. There's nothing inherently immoral about manufacturing weapons. Someone may need to manufacture a knife or a gun or whatever for self-defense. But then the question is, who am I giving this to? There is a moral tie. If I make a gun and I hand it to somebody who says, I am going to use this in a bank robbery, I can't sell that gun because I will have some kind of moral participation in that event. So I can't do that. Israel says, even though they say that they're the most moral army in the world, they basically say, well, we don't have any control about, what happens. CBS Evening News with Dan Rather explained in 1983 that Israel's prowess in Guatemala was tried and tested on the West Bank and Gaza, designed simply to beat the guerrilla. One Israeli advisor in Guatemala, Lieutenant Colonel Amatzia Shwali, had clearly taken the Israeli government's message to heart. He said, I don't care what the Gentiles do with the arms. The main thing is that the Jews profit. I didn't say it. I'm just reading a quote. Despite an international arms embargo, genocide allegations were no impediment for senior representatives of Myanmar to attend in uniform Israel's biggest weapons and security conference in Tel Aviv in 2019. After a few journalists reported on the visit, also revealing that South Sudanese officials had attended, Israel reluctantly agreed that representatives from Myanmar would no longer be allowed to attend Israeli arms fairs while a global weapons embargo was in place. You have to keep in mind, this cuts at the heart of how Israel functions because they, in 1948, during the first truce, when there was an arms embargo, illegally brought in weapons from Czechoslovakia to fight and murder and kill the Palestinians. So they don't really care about arms embargo. And remember, international law, that's for other people. That's for the goyim. That has nothing to do with the chosen people. Chosen people can do whatever they want. International law is a theory, or it may be law for everyone else. But Israel has nothing to do with international law. They don't care about it. And again, whatever they may say, you believe people by their actions, not by what they say. If you're enjoying this content, consider hitting like, subscribe, sharing this with people who might be interested in what's actually happening in Palestine. Now, what you have to think about, too, is what are the implications for other nation states that look to Israel? Because it's not as if Israel is a pariah and nobody has anything to do with them. Despite the widespread slaughter of Palestinians live streamed on social media for more than a year, many countries continue to trade, countries continue to have diplomatic relations, and in fact, some countries admire what Israel's doing. One of those countries is India. Israel's supposed belief in democracy, Gordon continued, was unlike neighboring states that never claimed to be democratic. This attraction stems from the sense, real or perceived, that fighting terrorism through methods of homeland security that include suspending due process in many areas of the criminal justice system, including torture, the right to a speedy trial, the freedom from arbitrary police searches, and the prohibition against indefinite incarceration and incognito detentions, to mention a few methods, does not conflict with democratic values. Thus, the ultimate attractiveness towards the Israeli experience in fighting terrorism, and I'm saying that in quotes, that's not in quotes there, is to its ability to link a militaristic worldview with a neoliberal economic agenda and a democratic political regime. And so when people claim it's the only democracy in the Middle East, it's people also have to add beyond that, it's the only really democracy of its kind. The way that it conducts itself is so unlike the rest of the world that it needs to be questioned or have some modifiers put towards it. The growing affection between Israel and India was not just ideological, and I suppose some context here, you have to understand that Narendra Modi's government has an ethno-nationalist vision for Hindu nationalism and is quite anti-Muslim. And now you can see, well, if we're anti-Muslim and you're anti-Muslim, we should be friends. The growing affection between Israel and India was not just ideological, a mutual embrace of ethno-nationalism. The exchange of defense equipment helped enforce it. India does not need Israel to teach it how to oppress the Kashmiris, but the Jewish state has given the world's biggest democracy the tools and legitimacy to pursue it with extreme prejudice. And it is not just in Kashmir where India is pursuing Israeli-style policies. In 2022, authorities in the state of Uttar Pradesh demolished the homes of Muslims who were accused of ties to religious protests that turned violent. The sight of bulldozers destroying homes was eerily reminiscent of Israeli actions against Palestinian structures in East Jerusalem and the West Bank. Like Israel, India claimed that the homes had been built illegally. Following a 2014 agreement between Israel and India pledging to cooperate on public and homeland security, countless Indian officers, special forces, pilots, and commandos visited Israel for training. In 2020, Israel refused to screen Indian police officers to determine if they had committed any abuses in India. What does morality have to do with us? Israeli human rights advocate Atai Mack and a range of other activists petitioned the Israeli Supreme Court in 2020 to demand that Israel stop training Indian police officers who blind, murder, rape, torture, and hide civilians in Kashmir. But why would they do that? They feel right at home with the IDF. The IDF loves blinding, murdering, raping, torturing, and hiding civilians. I don't understand. And I suppose there's a sort of... I appreciate the work of someone like Atai Mack. I'm not trying to ridicule it. But he's going against the practice of the IDF in his argument. And unsurprisingly, the court rejected the request. And in the words of the three justices, without detracting from the importance of the issue of human rights violations in Kashmir. Again, all that is paid is lip service, but no reality. And the tie here that is always fought when we bring up the word apartheid, because what we're seeing with India and Israel is present-day contemporary cooperation. People say, "Oh, South African apartheid has nothing to do with what's going on in Israel." But what do we have as the evidence of that? One of these prominent Jewish dissidents was Ronnie Kasriels, who served as the Minister for Intelligence between 2004 and 2008 under an ANC government. He told The Guardian that the comparison between the two nations wasn't accidental. Israelis claim that they are the chosen people, the elect of God, and find a biblical justification for their racism and Zionist exclusivity, he said. This is just like the Afrikaners of apartheid South Africa, who also had the biblical notion that the land was their God-given right. Like the Zionists who claimed that Palestine in the 1940s was a land without people for a people without land, so the Afrikaner settlers spread the myth that there were no black people in South Africa when they first settled in the 17th century. They conquered by force of arms and terror, and the provocation of a series of bloody colonial wars of conquest. I mean, if there was nobody there, why would you have to have a war? A few months after Vorster's visit, the South African government yearbook explained that both states were facing the same challenge. Israel and South Africa have one thing above all else in common. They are both situated in a predominantly hostile world, inhabited by dark peoples. The relationship between the nations was broad, but also sworn to secrecy. In April 1975, a security agreement was signed that defined the relationship for the next 20 years. A clause within the deal stated that both parties pledged to keep its existence concealed. Truth doesn't need hiding. Lies need hiding. Why would you need to keep your agreement with South Africa secret if it was a wonderful thing and you have nothing to be ashamed of? Israel ignored the UN Security Council imposed arms embargo. Israel ignored an arms embargo. What a surprise! Israel ignored the UN Security Council imposed arms embargo on South Africa while telling the world that it was complying. Remember, this is the most moral army in the world. The deputy director of Israel's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Hanan Bar-On, sent a telegram to the ministry director, David Kimchi, on August 29, 1984 to explain, "The Israeli policy is that we do not in any way admit such sales to an Israeli or to a foreign actor, and certainly not to an American congressman, even if he is considered a friend, and the relationship with him is supposedly intimate." Remember, AIPAC tells you what to do. It doesn't mean that AIPAC owes you anything. As I said, this is an express review. I'm going to send you over to my longer review if you like what you're hearing. And as I said in the original review, I just love that cover. It makes it look like it's actually recording what's going on. And that's what's important about Antony Loewenstein's work. Also, I think he is on social media, on X, and I think he's got a YouTube channel. Go give him a follow. Thank him for his work. This book is really new and gives us an updated version of some of the older, more historical books that we're reading, where, let's say, it was written in the 80s or the 90s. This is something that was written in the 2020s. So it has a lot of up-to-date information, which you can share with your friends, which you can do by sharing this channel. Hit like, subscribe, share. If you'd like to buy a copy of the book, there's a link in the description. That's one of the ways that you can support this channel. You can also support the channel by sending a Buy Me a Coffee or a PayPal. There's links to that in the description. If you want to support us on an ongoing basis, use Patreon or YouTube membership. There's links to that. You'll get early reviews or early copies of these reviews, as well as the opportunity to speak with me behind the scenes and talk to me about my process and how I select books. Reminder that profits from all these different income streams go towards the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. This is a passion project of mine. It's right now, we haven't gotten the channel monetized yet, but we're on our way. And once it does, we'll be able to send those funds directly to them. In the meantime, if you'd like to support the Palestine Children's Relief Fund, there's a link in the description. Support them directly or support them indirectly by contributing to the channel. They help Palestinian children get medical care who could not otherwise get it. And if you'd like to sponsor a future book review, take a look at my Amazon wish list. That's also linked below. Pick a book out of there and send it to me, and I will get to it. If it's on my wish list, it means I already want to review it and I have a place for it on the bookshelf. As always, until next time, enjoy your reading.